People are still joining, but I will start the webinar either how. For those who join late, you can always rewatch the webinar. We will send it to you afterwards. But welcome to part 1 of 2 of these webinars on the subject of the CRA. Today's presentation will be held by Maxim Baele. He is a principal consultant here at Toreon and also a core team member of OWASP SAM. He has a lot of experience on these subjects, which is why he will give you this webinar. During the webinar, you will also see in the on screen that there is a Q&A function. We will hold the questions for the Q&A until after the webinar, but feel free to ask them while we are still giving the presentation. Should your question not be answered during our session today, we will also get all the questions by mail and answer them afterwards. So without any further ado, I would like to give the word to Maxim.
Thank you very much, Jordan. So, first of all, because I have an eye on the attendee list, I see some familiar faces, so thank you for joining. This is going to be a repeat of lots of the content. Is going to be a little bit of a repeat on what the first webinar we did on the Cyber Resilience Act, but meanwhile, we're more than 1 year further, and I learned a lot. The regulation itself evolved a little bit more, the standardization, lots of discussions happened, making things more clear. So see these webinars, this first one, as a recap of the information on the Cyber Resilience Act as an introduction. And the second session is going to be how can you prepare, basically, and with a OWASP SAM, of course. So with that, let me dive into the content. The Cyber Resilience Act. The CRA, or the Cyber Resilience Act. What is it? It is a European regulation that introduces cybersecurity requirements as part of CE marking for products with digital elements, and was published in the official journal of the European Union 20th of November 2024, so a little more than a year ago. So a European regulation, what is it actually? Well, that's a legal act of the European Union, which becomes immediately enforceable as law in all member states simultaneously. Another regulation that you're all, I guess, familiar with is the GDPR, or the General Data Protection Regulation. A regulation is different from a directive, such as, for example, the Directive on Security of Network and Information Systems, or NIS. With the regulation, whatever is put into the official journal of the European Union becomes law, and is the same law for every country in the European Union. With a directive, it needs to be transposed into national law, and countries do this sequentially. Most of them just take over the text as is, and that's it. But also, since it needs to be transposed, some countries can choose to do a little bit less, do a little bit more, or be very late, like we were initially within this one in Belgium. But the CRA is a regulation, meaning that basically the countdown timer has started. It has been published in the official journal of the European Union, and it will take effect in its current form. So, cybersecurity requirements as part of the CE marking for products with digital elements. What is a product with digital element? Well, this is a new term. They invented this for this regulation. It means a software or hardware product and its remote data processing solutions, including software or hardware components being placed on the market separately. That's the official definition from the legislation. And to visualize this, come back with me to approximately 2010 to a retail store like Fnac or like Van den Borre we have in Belgium. And the reason I'm taking you there, at least at that point in time, is, well, you already had smart devices back then, smart TV, smart audio, game consoles, whatever you have there. Everything in this picture would be included in the regulation as being a product with digital elements. Reason why I picked 2010 is because back then you also had these boxes with DVDs on the shelves. So back then you had boxes with software, desktop software, and also that is being included in the regulation. So looking specifically at Microsoft Office these days, when you have a package of Microsoft Office or similar type of software that is being installed on an end user's device, that would be in scope of the regulation. The web version, however, like the pure as a service offering, would not be in scope of the regulation. That, as a matter of fact, falls under a different regulation. That falls on the NIS2 directive. And NIS2 in this case for IT service providers takes into account scale and what have you not. So what else? Well, if you go to any of the Office apps, to Facebook, to your local bank, and you're doing that just via your computer, and you're using a web browser, these things are not, these websites or these web applications, they are not in scope of the regulation. What is? Are the browsers, because they are seen as like the window on which you view the web, and they fall under this additional scrutiny, but also running on end-user devices again. Now, these same applications, when viewed via the web, are not in scope. However, if they are put onto a end-user device directly, such as an Android phone or an iPhone, again, they're in scope. So mobile applications are in scope too. Video and video cameras, IoT, these kind of things, these are in scope. These are even hardware, a mix of hardware and software. They have a network connection. They're in scope, but not only are the actual end-user devices here in scope, the platforms to which they send the data is also in scope of the regulation. And this is a specific case where, both the platform, it could be in scope of both the Cyber Resilience Act and NIS2. So specifically, if the platform, even though it's hosted as a service, is treating data from a product with digital elements, it falls under the scope, specifically if the product couldn't be used basically without the platform. One of the reasons they did this, I don't know if you see the brand name Verkada, is an IoT security manufacturer who got a pretty big breach. It's one of the reasons that the CRA was introduced is because we have so many still insecure security cameras, insecure security devices that are being placed on the European market today. Fridges and any actual home appliance which has, I would say, a single control loop. They might have a little bit of firmware, a little bit of code to regulate temperature or, make something go beep. As in say, they're not in scope, as long as they're simple. But these days, manufacturers cannot wait to add all of these actual fancy features to your fridge, bringing them in scope of the regulation. And again, one of the reasons why the CRA is being put in place is the UK consumer representative organization, which they did a questionnaire and they asked back in June 2024 how long smart tech would last, so specifically smart fridge freezers. And it was a little bit disappointing. So there's a few brands that answered with reasonable support, meaning if you buy a Bosch smart freezer, you would get support back up until 2034. Same with Siemens, but Samsung and LG support is from 5 years, but only from the appliance launch date. It could be that you buy a fridge that no longer gets security updates. And other manufacturers basically didn't answer or didn't have a reasonable support time there. So goal of the Cyber Resilience Act, as we'll discuss later, is to raise this bar to a common level. Cars are out of scope, because cars are covered by more specific legislation again. So in this case, you need to see R154 and 155. And I specifically chose a Bosch Cayman here because it is the first car that was basically canceled early because of cybersecurity reasons. Once the regulation came out, Bosch decided that they couldn't properly secure this car and they retired it early. So what else? We have cars, we have medical devices, aerospace. shipping, rail freight, and of course defense, they are all exempt because they all have more specific regulation that is going way beyond often what the CRA mentions, and so they don't fall under regulation. With a little bit of a twist, because in case of the trains, in this case, they would not fall under the CRA if they have a more specific legislation. However, the specific legislation is currently still like in progress, meaning as a fallback, trains do fall under the CRA. Now, in all honesty, I don't think we'll ever see a train try and become CRA compliant. I do think that the specific regulation would take or would be there and be in effect early enough. However, I'm explaining this to tell you that this is CRA is really a broad market, like broad covering regulation, and the goal is to read kind of like a net, making sure that no exemptions are there. It's kind of like a fallback mechanism. So these fancy peoples with hats, they are from VLC. VLC is a very popular open source video media player. Now, every company, of course, these days is using open source. They all do. And the thing is, open source, it tends to bring a lot of vulnerabilities. Not everyone is treating open source that well. And in the beginning, Cyber Resilience Act treated open source almost like a company or a vendor. But these are people doing this in their free time. They cannot comply with the legislation or wouldn't want to. Most of the licenses start really with no liability, use at your own risk, and so forth. And so they're actually exempt. With the Cyber Resilience Act, the open source community is really coming together in Europe to try and defend the position of people that just do stuff because it's cool in their free time. Now, if an open source community, a group of open source maintainers really wants their software to be used commercially, they can get like a special status called an open source steward, in which case they, I would say, voluntarily comply with some of the CRA requirements, making it so that it's easier to integrate into your product. Now, other people in open source with hats, of course, are well known, are Red Hat. But Red Hat is it's not non-commercially open source. It is very much commercially supported open source software. And as such, they're just fully in scope of the regulation. So why this? Because making something open source doesn't exempt you from then having to make it secure. Now, going back to your products with digital elements, these are divided into different categories. And the default category is, I would say, again, the fallback mechanism. Then we have the important class 1, important class 2. In the default category, we have things like games, toys, photo editing software, things that are not really, things that aren't really security critical. In the important class, we see password managers, we see standalone and embedded browsers, SIEM systems, things that are a little bit more security critical. In important class 2, we see operating systems, firewalls, things that really underpin the security of most of the other products. We even have a critical class, such as containing really stuff that underpins the security of all of the other things. See it a little bit like an inverse pyramid, where the critical class has the least amount of products, but they are super security critical. The important class 2 and class 1 have a little bit more products, and default is, I would say, 90% of products, or the aim is to have 90% of the products in the default category. In the default category, you can get away with a self-attestation. Your products still need to comply, but you can get away with a self-attestation, meaning that as long as your product is compliant, you don't need to jump into additional bureaucratic hoops, don't need to get third-party attestation, and so forth. For important class 1, then there's the option to use a standard to prove compliance, but you can still self-attest. For important class 2, you need to use a standard and you need a third-party attestation. And for critical, there's probably going to be a separate classification, like a separate scheme that products need to follow called the EU Common Criteria. which is very, very stringent on security. So as the criticality increases, the requirements and also how strict requirements are imposed, they grow. So to recap, products with digital elements go back to FNAC circa 2010. If it's not covered by an other regulation, or if it's not non-commercially supported open source, it is probably in. Now in our definition, we have another thing of interest. Being placed on the market. While it doesn't stand out by itself, it is a very important term. Being placed on the market actually comes from the new approach, or Council Resolution of 7 May 1985 on the new approach to technical harmonization and standards. It is basically the structure that gave us the open market in the EU. So under this, then they list a set of essential safety requirements or other requirements of the general interest to which products that are being put on the market must conform and therefore enjoy free movement in the EU. And the way you basically make the way that you show that you are able to place your products on the European market is by applying the CE mark. These days, it gave rise to the new legislative framework, and it is it's the framework that basically guides how the CE label is applied, which products, which standards, and so forth, and how manufacturers, how importers, and how distributors need to comply. Everything there is actually written down in what's called the Blue Guide. And the Blue Guide is the book. If you're making today any hardware device, you will have someone in your organization who's familiar with the Blue Guide already. So the Blue Guide tells manufacturers, importers, and distributors how they can comply. And so the CE, in a sense, is essential safety requirements. And it's quite important to know that now we're using this regulation, not just for safety, but for cybersecurity. But as the regulation is still like, there's lots of things still happening, lots of questions still open. I found it very helpful to just look at how today the safety regulation or the safety aspects are covered, because it gives you a very good idea of how the cybersecurity aspects will be covered in the future when the Cyber Resilience Act goes into full effect. So on the new legislative framework, under that framework, products are placed on the market by a manufacturer or an importer when they supply a product to a distributor or end user for the first time. When they're put there, so made available on the market, they must apply with the applicable union harmonization legislation at the moment of placement on the market. Why are manufacturer, importer, and distributor in bold? It's because they share responsibility here. They all have their obligations, and they need to ensure that when you're manufacturing something for the European market, when you're importing it into the EU, when you're distributing it, that the CE mark is applied and the products are conform to the market. To what the market demands, basically. Now, on the CRA, if you're non-compliant, then you risk fines up to 50 million or 2.5% of your yearly global turnover if you're having non-conformity with the essential requirements. I'll go later in a bit of detail there. Fines up to 10 million or 2% of your yearly global turnover for failing to meet the administrative requirements, just your technical dossier and what have you not even your product could be insecure, but this is even worse. Your documentation is not okay. And then fines up to 500K or 1% of yearly global turnover for misleading the market surveillance authority. So these stack. And of course, your product loses the CE mark. Now, the thing is, that's one thing. These type of fines already exist. When do they apply? That's something else. So if we look at the moment when placing on the market, let me get here a conveyor belt. Voila, we have a factory. This factory is shipping products, and the legislation itself, when it will apply, let's say 11 p.m. the day before a product rolls off the conveyor belt, it doesn't need to comply. 11:30, a product rolls over a conveyor belt, it doesn't need to apply. 12 a.m., like the 1 minute, let's say after midnight of the day that the regulation takes effect, that is the moment your product needs to comply. And every subsequent product needs to comply. So this is not the moment you introduce a product. It is individual. Each individual product that rolls on this conveyor belt has its specific scope. Like it's 5 products that are produced earlier could not be in scope. All the rest produced later can be in scope. So I've had lots of questions already from people that are asking, like, well, we are already manufacturing this product. Does it need to comply? Are we exempt or what have you not? No, this is product specific, and it's really unique to every individual product. So if you're making a product for 20 years and you're going to make it for 20 more years, you probably need to make it compliant to the Cyber Resilience Act. So I mentioned when it would take effect. Well, it was published in the official journal of the European Union on the 20th of 11, 2024. And after publication, it took a few days, 20 days to basically take effect, 11th of December 2024. And from there, the clock started ticking. So 21 months later, next year, on the 11th of September 2026, the notification obligation starts. And 36 months after, the regulation becomes fully applicable. So the 11th of December 2027, remember when you hear this conveyor belt, if you're producing products after the 11th of December 2027, they will need to comply with the Cyber Resilience Act. So the notification obligation, let's zoom in on that one first. What is it? It's a reporting of actively exploited vulnerabilities in products with digital elements, as well as severe incidents impacting the security of connected products to public authorities. And within 72 hours after an early warning, within 24 hours, for every product that has ever been put on the market. And this is not product specific. While I was earlier explaining this is from 11th of December and conveyor belt and what have you not, this is an aspect of the regulation that falls on the company, not on the product itself. And what needs to be reported is not vulnerabilities, not stuff that could go wrong. It is active incidents. Let's say you're producing set-top boxes for home or whatever, and you become aware of a botnet that has taken hold of most of your products. That's the moment where you call, in this case, CCB, or in Belgium, CCB, so tell them, look, we have an issue, and report the incident. You report this so that they can help European customers take their precautions and, for example, disconnect these set-top boxes so that attacks can be mitigated. You also report it as a bit of a pressure mechanism to make sure that you update it. But here's a catch. It's every product that has ever been put on the market. This means that if customers are still using a product after 20 or 30 years, you've long stopped support of that product, you're not really obliged to fix it, but you are obliged to report it. Again, so that end users can be properly informed and be protected. So for Belgium, that will probably be the Center for Cybersecurity in Belgium. Now the other part, the fully applicable part, starts of the 11th of December 2027. Of course, the notification obligation stays. And that starts with simple, a declaration of conformity. Here's your CE label. It needs to be supported by technical documentation. And this technical documentation is basically a bundle of evidence, paperwork that proves that your product is secure by design and secure by default. That it adheres to the Cyber Resilience Act in a risk-based fashion. So the Cyber Resilience Act in Annex 1 explains a set of security requirements. And these security requirements, they are super high level. They're really generic. And every manufacturer needs to do a risk analysis, not of their own company, but on how a user would use this product. And based on this risk analysis, needs to select which security requirements would apply and to what extent they would apply. And your technical documentation needs to, in the end, prove that you did this analysis. And then finally, vulnerability management. Products will need to be released on the market without exploitable vulnerabilities, and they will need to have a minimum of 5 years of security support. So reason I chose the iceberg here is because the part that tells you that you need to be CE compliant is actually not that hard. Most of the work is under the water. And if you look at most of the work, that's where you need to realize it's an outcome-based regulation. So you don't get a checklist. You don't get an easy way out for compliance. You cannot checkbox, yes, we did this. You need to make an analysis. This analysis needs to be documented. And every step of the way in your development lifecycle, you basically need to, every action that you do needs to hark back to this risk, analysis that you need to do, and to this selection of security requirements, how far you want to go, and so forth. So if you look into the development lifecycle, that is the whole part under the water. That's what I'm basically mentioning. Is you need to do this not just at operations, or not just when releasing. For 5 years at minimum, after you put your product on the market, you need to support this, and your whole development lifecycle needs to support this. That's hence why we call this a secure development lifecycle. In a secure development lifecycle, you're not adding on security. Security is a core part of your development, and the absolute minimum. Like normally, this is my segue into explaining you on OWASP SAM. We'll leave that for the second webinar. For this one, I've picked out a few of the actions that are directly related to CRA compliance. So first of all, you need to start with a risk assessment, a product risk assessment, a risk assessment on how an end user might use this device, in what environment it would be used, what would a normal environment look like, what would normal behavior look like, what would risky behavior look like, what would be a bad idea, and also taking into account the extent, like the end of life, like how long are you going to build this? If it's a smart fridge with AI, it's probably going to be supported for longer than 5 years, because fridges in general last longer. I hope they're built to last for 10 years. Sometimes it could be that it's shorter. So while the minimum is still 5 years, if you have a very good reason, support period can be shorter, but then someone else, you're legally obliged to hand over basically all the tools to a third party who wants to support your product at your end of life. That's a caveat. But still, you start with a risk assessment, and this risk assessment is not on the financial impact on your company when a product gets hacked. This risk assessment is basically on what could go wrong on a customer's network when this device, for example, is being put into a network. How could this affect our end user or society or whatever as a whole? This risk assessment needs to feed into a threat model, which is where you select. Threat modeling is whiteboard hacking. It's one of Toreon's, one of the things we're very well known for. And it's one of the activities in the development lifecycle, I think, where I see the biggest bang for buck. In its simplest form, you put a group of people, engineers, on a whiteboard. You let them draw a data flow diagram of the product, and basically let them break their architecture before a single line of code has been written. And this threat model informs you in a more detailed, more granular way what could go wrong based on what you initially determined, where the product would be used, and what the environment would be. And it informs the selection of security requirements, tying back to Annex 1 of the regulation. It feeds into the secure implementation, including, for example, static code analysis, security scanning. It feeds into functional and non-functional testing. And finally, in secure configuration and user documentation. All of these steps are intertwined. And this facilitates shared responsibility. And I realize when talking about this to people, not everyone knows what the shared responsibility is. So this goes back basically from to the whole cloud environment. And this is where it's easiest explained, is from Microsoft. If you're having software as a service, in this case, as a customer, you're responsible for information and data, for devices, for accounts. You're sharing maybe identity and directory infrastructure with the cloud provider, and all of the rest is provided by the cloud provider. When you're doing infrastructure as a service, for example, on the customer falls way more responsibility than on the cloud provider. And if you're doing something on-prem, it is fully on you. The reason I'm talking about the shared responsibility model in this way is that now the Cyber Resilience Act asks you to determine very well where, as a manufacturer, your responsibility ends and where that one of the customer starts. How can a customer also use this product in the most secure way? And you need to inform them, give them all of the tools and all the information that is needed to use this product in the most secure way. So this is not facilitating shared responsibility. You might be familiar with these US cups, caution contents may be hot. It is not. This is an exempt from a power tool that I bought, and what is explained here is potentially dangerous situations. So again, this is safety, but it doesn't assume I'm an idiot. It assumes that I'm going to cut wood with it, which is what it's made for, and explains how I can do this in a safe way. All of this, for example, these safety devices, they are further specified in standards. And we dive in standards in a little bit further into the presentation. Going back to our development lifecycle, what I didn't cover yet was the software bill of materials. A software bill of materials is a standard machine-readable list of ingredients for products. It's like what's on the back of a bottle of ketchup. That's why I have the picture here. It's not a recipe. It's not an end-to-end recipe that allows anyone to copy your product, but it gives an indication. I have food allergies, I read the ingredients list, and I know what to avoid. It needs to be in a standard and machine-readable way, and two of those are SPDX or Cyclone DX. I would say both are equal. They have their pros and cons. And for the CRA, only the first level is mandated, and only for the technical documentation. So while we recommend that you keep an SBOM and ideally even share this with customers, the regulation for now mandates just first level, and only basically for your documentation to prove that you have a view on all of your vulnerabilities. You need to continuously monitor any third-party vulnerability that is in there. And of course, you need to do incident response. So these are, I would say, the absolute minimum actions. Each of them is, I would say, an iceberg on itself. It requires education. It requires time to establish as a process. All of these require also output. So all of these will require, they will need to generate these evidences, these things that you in the end put in your technical documentation file. So if you are a small development shop who's used to doing things very informally, this might need to change. So on the standards can give you a presumption of conformity. The good thing about implementing a standard is that you don't need to go to the law and basically argue on what is in the law, whether you're conformant or not. Standards are there to help manufacturers build compliant products in a more pragmatic way. And ETSI and Senelec are the two standardization organizations that are right now creating the Cyber Resilience Act standards. If you go into the landscape of products, there's in total 41 standards that are coming. So it starts with the principles of cyber resilience, which is like the most high level of them all. And that one doesn't give you presumption of conformity, it's just setting the stage. Vulnerability management, that one, if you're implementing it correctly, would provide presumption of conformity. And then the security requirements standard. So there's 13 standards on security requirements. Each of them aligns with one line, I would say, in the Annex 1 of the regulation, further specifying it. All of these can be considered horizontal because they apply to all of the products. And then you have the vertical standards for the important and critical products, 26 in total. The first two are coming, or they need to be officially and delivered by the 30th of August next year, which is pretty late, specifically for the vulnerability management, but I'll nuance this in a second. Security requirements are coming a little bit later, 13th of October 2027. And the per product ones are coming also in October. Reason why this pointy finger is there, because I'd like to dive into how you can prepare. Because these standards, they're full in development. And through your national standardization body, for Belgium that is NBN, you can go to the public inquiry for these standards. And they are the EN 40,000, 1.2 and 1.1 that are currently available. and not only read them, get an idea of what is coming, but also give feedback. And this is super important. If you as a manufacturer, as an importer, as a distributor feel that the standards are not good enough, that they don't give you enough information, enough tools, they're ambiguous, this is the time that you can and should actually read the standards and draw up some comments. This is for the horizontal standards. The vertical standards, they are available through stand4cra.eu. All of these links will be shared, of course, where they gradually, as they become available, they're sharing the standards there. You don't need to do this on your own. So there's many sectoral organizations that are actively following up on the standardization and are actually participating too. So if you haven't yet done so, please join one of these sector organizations, because very often they have working groups around these standards, and you don't need to follow up on all of the mails that the standardization bodies are putting out. You don't need to go through the commenting process. The comments can go through these sector organizations. And the good thing is, first of all, it reduces the bureaucracy on the end of the standardization bodies. It also allows you to first convene with peers, people in the same situation, to further refine your input. And I think of everything, I'm still going to say this is one of the most important things. Go join one of these organizations, find where the standardization liaison work is happening and participate. But also, very important, make product security someone's job. Because if it's not yet in your company a job, it's going to need to be a job. This needs to be someone with a technical background. Unfortunately, I see people tasked from a legal background, and let me put it like this. Okay, I see people coming to me from a legal background, needing to help the company become CRA compliant, but they still need this technical background to actually succeed. The work that needs to happen very close to the actual development work, so they will be most successful very close to the actual engineers. Historically, they would have a role like CTO, architect, or lead developer. These people are often well placed. And in a new role, they get the hat of product security architect, officer, or manager. They're a security champion. They are not the person that's going to fix security for the whole organization. They have an advisory role. They are someone who can translate the legal aspects into the more technical aspects and the technical challenges back onto the table of management so that they can comply. And of course, legal and compliance team they're one of their main stakeholders, but they actually need support from the full organization. So let me see, I have a few more minutes. Getting started, some questions. We will share a lot of this information later, but some questions you can already ask yourself. What do your software development processes look like today? If you today do not have a formal development lifecycle, then maybe it's time to agree on one. Agree on a policy and where security fits in this development lifecycle. Do you have up-to-date diagrams and design documentation? Because these are the basis for the risk analysis of a threat modeling. Do you have formal documentation that you can share with customers? Some organizations have very informal documentation. Some of our organizations have, like, the documentation is in the code. However, that doesn't always work. You will need to provide to your customers security relevant documentation. And so if you're today not publishing security documentation for your customers, that is another thing that you need to look into. If you didn't yet do a risk analysis, now is the time to do so. Not just for upcoming products, but to basically do a gap analysis and establish as a company, where do our products fit? How do you want to protect them? These kind of things to see how far do you need to go basically to comply with security requirements? Who are the points of contact for security matters? If today you don't have a person, like a single person, that is the go-to person for security, go back to make this someone's job. At minimum, you should have a security at company domain dot whatever email address, and internally it should go to someone who is known in the organization that actually answered this mailbox. So both internally and externally, you need to have a point of contact. If you have policies, all the better. list them because they also become part of your evidences. Do you have a view on your third-party components? If you don't have it today, go to your engineering organization and ask, okay, can you compile me an SBOM? See how long it takes. Get a confidence level from them, like, okay, how complete is this? And put it in a tool like Dependency Track that can visualize the amount of vulnerabilities that are in today. No need for automation yet. Just get a view on the third-party components that are in the product, and ideally start, like, push your development teams to automate the generation of this SBOM, so you can have a better and quicker view on the third-party risk that you're exposed to. So next steps for you: go determine the classification, whether you're in the default category, important 1, 2, or critical. There's a list of examples, and there is also published a more detailed description of the various products in these categories in a separate document. Follow up on the standards development. I already mentioned this. Reach out to a conformity assessment body when applicable, but also when they are there. I don't think they are yet selected, but conformity assessment bodies are the third-party attestation bodies, basically, that are going to help you comply with this regulation. Join an industry association or an ISAC, working group that is sharing information. And implement and test a vulnerability handling process. If December is a little bit of a slow month, like between Christmas and New Year, go sit at a table with a few people and just run through, okay, we're like, someone has submitted a responsible disclosure to us, like an ethical hacker submitted a responsible disclosure. And then see what steps you need to fix this, see how you would track this, see how quickly you could fix this. And this would already give you an idea of how prepared you would be for September 2026, next year. And then finally, seek advice when in doubt. And you're on our webinar, so I hope you're coming to seek advice with us, with Toreon. And with that, I'm going to give it back to you, Jordan.
Yes, thank you, Maxim, for this really in-depth presentation. It was very interesting. Now I do see we have some questions in the chat as well. I do have some questions of my own.
Let me check.
First of all, maybe...
I don't hear Jordan. Wait, let me first stop my screen.
You can't hear me? Can anyone else hear me? Hello, hello.
Okay.
Test.
Cass, I'm answering a question from you.
Okay.
To what extent could ISO 27001 certification serve as a presumption of compliance with the CRA, as the scope of the certificate would be the digital product? At this moment, because the ISO 27001 has too big of a gap to serve as an official standard. So ENISA did analysis of existing standards to see how big the gap was to be used for the Cyber Resilience Act. And the ISO 27001 doesn't go into enough depth to be used for product development. It would give you a good basis, especially in ISMS, would give you a good basis to have policies in there. And again, it would give you a framework that would make it a lot easier to become compliant. Also, this is going to be a change track. Lots of companies are not going to be able to like switch and immediately build secure products. So for this change track, it's good if you already have this process in place that you're like having evidences, you're having internal audits, you're having this plan, do, check, act cycle, and what have you not. In all honesty, I would say go for an ISO for your organizational level, get your ducks in a row there, and then go for CRA compliance with the applicable standards. Or tune in for the next webinar to do it with Sam. So Walid, if I'm a manufacturer of a class 1 product, but I buy my digital elements to a third party, how can I make sure that my product will comply? What are my responsibilities and what are there? So if you're a manufacturer of a class 1 product, it's the product that you manufacture that needs to comply with the category that you, with the applicable category. So if you're manufacturing, let's say, important class 1 product, then the full product needs to comply with the regulation or the standards for important class 1. If you source products, then actually you need to hold your vendors, your suppliers. You need to hold them accountable that they deliver to you the products that are not lowering the security level of the end result. And so your responsibilities are basically making sure that your supply chain management, is up to par, and you have a good communication with your vendors. Also, if you're just in the middle, let me put it like this, and there is a vulnerability, know that it's not just supply chain management, it is also this vulnerability management that's bidirectional and needs to cover your full supply chain. So if you have a component that has potential vulnerability, you might receive this as a responsible disclosure, but then it appears that this is third-party manufacturer. You need to make sure that they do their job and respond within an appropriate time frame. So I hope that answers your question. SEPA, what options are there to get certified if you produce software? Do you need to have every new version evaluated, or are there other options? Well, that's one where there's still, starting a live answer. Okay, good. So what options are there to get certified if you produce software? Do you need to have every new version evaluated, or are there any other options? That's a topic where there's currently a lot of discussion. It is like this, that as long as the update is free of charge, it's okay. But in general, you will need to supply security updates for every new version that you put out. And so a typical example would be if you're putting out version 2025.1, and then later in the year 2025.4, and so forth. Then version 1 would need support, version 2, 3, 4, and so forth. They would all need individual support. However, if I can upgrade as an end user freely from 2025.1 to 2025.4, then it's okay. And so, honestly, I can't give you an answer beyond that, because I'm still getting information on how this could be solved, for example, with licensing, or how the impact could be reduced so that you don't need to maintain an ever-growing list of versions. But it might, I would think that a few support mechanisms would emerge from this in the coming, I don't know, year or so, year and a half, that would tackle this, but I'm not aware of one at the moment. But as long as your security updates are free of charge, then for now you're good. So Lode, when I explained SBOM, I mentioned first level mandated. What does first level mean? Well, this is a bit of a catch. Go back to the bottle of ketchup. If I have the full list of ingredients, what I actually have is the as packaged list of ingredients. However, if I chose to, let's say, make my ketchup with like a flavor package where I put most of my ingredients in, and then add this to a base of, oil and tomatoes, then my ingredients list would be oil, tomatoes, and then flavor package. That's basically a first level SBOM. It doesn't tell you a lot. It tells you nothing in essence. So this is the malicious compliance. Aspect. So that's not okay. That's one of the reasons why it's being challenged at the moment. Ideally, you have an as packaged SBOM, meaning that you have a full ingredients list of what is in essence being put in the product in the end. When we gave the first webinar last year, it still also wasn't clear whether this SBOM was going to have to be shared with all of the all of your customers, or was only valid for the authorities. But now it's clear that it's for authorities. Luigi, how does the CRA Act interact with the existing GDPR requirements? If a vulnerability leads to a data breach, are we now reporting to two separate authorities with different timelines? As far as I know, yes. It doesn't, as far as I know, there's no single reporting platform for both. Let me check. Jordan, can I call you back on stage? Any questions from anyone else?
I don't think so. I don't think there have been any other questions in the chat.
He's also having issues. I'm happy. Well, I don't know if I should be happy, but...
Yes. Either way, if nobody else has
At least I was
questions,
happy that it turns out I wasn't just talking to myself the whole time.
no,
That was shit. A
one
new
more
question has
question.
been asked. Matthias, is there a framework self-assessment available to determine the product category? Unfortunately, at this time, no. We will share the link to the details of the products, and for now you can use that. Some of the standards, so if you go to stand4CRA.eu, that site, some of the standards also have a little bit more of a description as to where it applies. I think I have time for one more question, but you need to be quick on typing. And I just have a message from Jordan that indeed we don't hear you. So, yeah, no more questions. Should you have a question, feel free to ask in private. So ping me over email, maxim.baele@toreon.com. And I'm happy to answer your questions. Next week is the OS Benelux Day, so if you're attending the conference, I'll be running around there, and feel free to stop me and ask me any CRA-related question too. And of course, if you need more support, again, please reach out to our email. We're really happy to help. We're building up real expertise here in making sure that organizations are building secure products and compliant products too. With this, I'm going to end the webinar. And sorry for the technical difficulties at the beginning. I hope this was received well, and I wish you all a good day.